Hello, welcome to Baltic World, the premier channel discussing important issues facing Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Crispin, and today we have a fascinating look at one of the most interesting development projects happening in the world, which is the Rail Baltica, a high-speed rail network connecting Tallinn, Riga, Vilnius, Kaunas and Warsaw. It will allow you to travel from Estonia to Lithuania in 4 hours. Amazing. There's been some news regarding delays. We will get into it and discuss it at length. Before I do, consider liking and subscribing. Also, share these videos. It really helps grow the channel a ton and allows us to bring you more content. Quoting from ERR from Estonia, it's titled, Minister, Estonia needs 400 million euros for construction of Rail Baltic. The Rail Baltic project will be delayed by 4 years and an additional 400 million euros needs to be found for the construction of the railway, Minister of Economic Affairs and Infrastructure Taavi Ayers said on Friday. Ayers said that one reason for the postponement is it is not possible to accurately predict the final cost of the entire project. Quote, today we see that we also need to use the next EU period funds. As this is a TNT network project, the deadline for Europe is 2030. The year 2026 was our own deadline, the minister told ERR. It is thought that approximately 400 million euros is needed. However, this figure has yet to be taken as absolute since there is still no certainty as to construction prices. Work also needs to be done to find ways to do all things more optimally in order to try and save money. Estonia will need additional funds until 2030, Ayers said. However, the railway could be operational before 2030, he said. Quote, after all, we are trying to get the connections ready as soon as possible. I would very much like them to be ready in 2026 or 2027. This may mean that there will not be 2 pairs of tracks side by side and there will need to be specific places for trains to pass each other. And then in the future, it will need to be built to completion, he said. So leaving it there, obviously that is difficult news for Estonia, but I think we can get around that, and I'll explain why in a bit. Ever since I have been to the Baltic states, from the first time I went there, many years ago, the first thought that I've had in my mind is why? Why isn't there a high-speed rail network connecting all of these countries? To be able to travel from Tallinn to Riga to Vilnius in a short period of time will utterly transform the entire economic revival of that region. Because, let's say, just take tourism, one category. Companies all around the world will be able to advertise trans-Baltic trips. You'll be able to go from Estonia to Latvia to Lithuania to Poland all in one journey without having to organize 10 different steps of logistics to get from A to B. It does actually feel like even these countries are side by side and these are small countries. It feels like quite a long way going from Tallinn to Vilnius at the moment. There is no reason for that. And I'm from a country of Australia where it's thousands of kilometres to get anywhere. It's really, further from Sydney to Perth than it is from Portugal to Vilnius, right? Like we are talking vast distances, and yet the infrastructure is there to make that possible and relatively seamless. The fact that it takes a long time to get from Estonia to Lithuania, Poland is absurd. It's outrageous. And if you had the ability to sell like whole Baltic packages using a highway rail network, the number of tourists alone would many-fold increase, not 10, 20%, but many-fold. In fact, I would move to the Baltic states, at least for a few years, if this rail network was completed, because I could travel around that region, I could get to other parts of Europe, and I would invest locally in the local infrastructure and development. If we think about the Estonian e-passport visas, the huge attraction of digital entrepreneurs that are going to Tallinn at the moment, what an advantage for them it would be to be able to see the rest of the Baltic and invest locally. This is huge. And then for the people that live there already, to be able to commute to major cities on a daily basis, it expands the benefits out to the rural and remote areas that desperately need that development. And this has been true for most places that have had high-speed rail networks because people can actually live further out from the major cities. So people that are struggling to get into the housing market need to get sort of cheaper accommodation. It's great for them because they can still work in the cities where they need to earn a living. And also it'll attract people who have left those areas for better economic opportunities elsewhere. The latest census from 2020 in Latvia, I think, had something like 21% of the population over the age of 65. That is a seriously aging population. It's not as bad as Japan or Italy, but it's much worse than, say, Australia. And things are getting worse from there. Also, population decline. If you can have high-speed rail networks where people can travel rapidly between different places, then the young people will have much more incentive to come back to these countries because they'll be able to buy a place that's affordable in the rural areas and still work and live in the major cities. They can still go in and do all the things that young people like to do, go out on a Friday, Saturday night and things like that, and be able to make it home. So these little benefits, these lifestyle benefits accumulate and snowball and actually create a sort of a Pareto distribution of advantages. Ernst & Young did a cost-benefit analysis of the actual infrastructure project. I think it was the total project initially was about to be about 6 billion euros of investment, plus this 400 million euros, I expect. And yet it had many-fold benefit in terms of the investment. And I think Ernst & Young lowballed it. I think they were deliberately conservative in their estimates. They didn't even have any of the benefits of the population returning and travel and tourism, for example. They relied pretty much on freight, infrastructure, transportation, just the economic activity across borders. They didn't even account for the global reputation that this infrastructure development project has. Now, of course, the project isn't without criticism. For example, the 400 million euro cost blight is a direct consequence of a court case that was brought last year that reached the Estonian Supreme Court, where environmental groups said, look, the government hasn't done all of the groundwork, all the surveying required to judge the environmental impact of new transport corridors. And the court partially agreed with them. They said, look, you should really be looking at existing transport corridors, preferably in order to have this infrastructure development completed. And as a consequence of that, it's created delays and additional costs. So there are problems, but there's always problems with things like this. It doesn't need to be harmful to the environment and doesn't need to hurt people's living standards and things by having the rail go past. Quite the contrary. It should actually boost economic activity and attractiveness for that entire region. There's also a discussion and sort of agreed MOU between Estonia and Finland to potentially have an underwater tunnel connecting Helsinki to Tallinn. Now, that would be remarkable, but I think that's a bit of a ways off. I think the cost for that would be about 16 billion euros. It would be the largest tunnel of its kind in the world. Helsinki and Tallinn just aren't that big cities. We're not talking about connecting, Normandy with Dover here. We're talking two relatively small places. It's not to say it shouldn't happen. It could, but it shouldn't distract from the Rail Baltica project, which is a slam dunk for success once it's completed. And I do not accept that this needs to take till 2030. So one of the reasons for the time blowout, as the minister mentioned, was that it was a TNT network project. So 85% of this project is being funded from the EU. If they want to have this finished before 2030, then the Baltic countries need to raise money themselves. Now, Lithuania is already well on its way. It's constructing rail and should be done around 2026. The Poles are doing the same. They should be constructed 26, 27. So Estonia shouldn't allow itself to be left behind, neither should Latvia. 400 million euros is a lot of money in this constrained economic environment, for sure. They've just released a new budget for the new year. The new budget accounts for the fact that we've gone through this pandemic, there's been an economic slowdown, and so these delays could sort of be expected on that basis, but are totally unnecessary. And let's say you manage to get this done in 2026, not 2030. You'd have to expect more than 100 million euros per year worth of economic boost. Definitely would. I will 100% move to the Baltic states for a few years, and many, many other people would as well if we had this kind of infrastructure in place that allows rapid transportation across the region, because it is such a monumental benefit. And in terms of raising this money, internationalize it. So, for example, the OECD Secretary General Matthias Cormann, he used to be the Australian finance minister, a very accomplished individual. He has led meetings, steering groups of what's called the Blue Dot Network. It's a certification for infrastructure projects around the world. It was led by the United States, Japan, and Australia, but brings together 150 different business leaders, accounting for $12 trillion worth of asset management. So hedge funds, superannuation funds, 401ks, trying to put their money and investments in safe locations. Well, what happens is the Blue Dot Network certifies major development projects and says, look, the return on investment for this is going to be very, very good. It makes it super easy to attract international finance and investment into those projects. And I think that this should top that list. So if the Estonian government needs to get on the phone right now, call the OECD, find out how to get international investment for this development project, which I think is easily one of the most surefire blue ticket investment development projects in the world right now. Getting the funding for this should be trivial. So I do not accept under any circumstances people sort of sitting on their hands and waiting for 2030. That is outrageous. You can do much better. It doesn't need to break the back of the Estonians. All the money can be returned through, ticket sales and things like that just in the first couple of years. So I don't see this as being a problem at all. And so don't let the governments get away with being slow on this. You should get this done as soon as possible. In fact, forget 2026. Aim for 2025. You should be able to get international expertise, engineering to come in and do this. High-speed rail is now a very well-known quantity. There's been many tens of thousands of kilometers of high-speed rail laid around the world. Obviously, you want to maximize the local labor market utilization, so make sure you get local construction jobs and things like that as much as possible. But if it's going to be the difference between, something happening in 5-6 years and something happening in 2, bring in additional people from outside, because those additional years will be local economic activity boosting once the thing is constructed, particularly in the post-pandemic world as people want to travel more and they look at where they want to go. If you've got this high-speed rail corridor, it'll be so much easier to have like a joint pan-Baltic tourism drive to bring people in from around the world, not just tourism, but also entrepreneurs and investment, like the digital economy of Estonia, like I've said before, but also for Lithuania and Latvia as well. These are very, very underutilized places. These, I think, the most underappreciated places on Earth, and that's one of the reasons I had this channel, is to bring more attention to these countries. And as much as I can wax lyrical about it on this channel, infrastructure development projects like this lend real meat to what I'm saying. So I fully support this. I realize that infrastructure projects, particularly massive things that change the landscape and so on, can always be a bit controversial. But I have to say this would be the best thing that these countries have done for their own economics, for their own demography in terms of attracting the young people back to their home countries, that they have done in the last 30 years. So all power to those that are pushing this project forward. That's my view. Please give us your opinion, though. I mean, I'm obviously just one person giving my perspective. Love to hear your views. Leave them down below. We'll have discussions in the Week in Review, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.